welcome to How to Deal When the Shit Gets Real podcast. I'm Rietta.
And I'm Connie, and today we are talking with Jan Ferguson. So, Jan, tell us, how do you deal when shit gets real? Or really just a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, well, my whole life has been that way. No.
Exactly. That's why we have this podcast.
I had a relatively scathed, unimportant life when I was growing up. You know, close-knit family, two younger sisters. I'm the oldest. You know, family that was together the whole time, this type of thing. I know that, you know, not to put down other people that had that situation. I feel real bad for them. I guess I was just one of the lucky ones as far as that's concerned. Went to parochial school, so I was somewhat shielded, I guess you could call it, until I went to college. I went 2 years of public college. And it was a full 4-year degree, but I went 2 years there. Then I transferred out from, I originally was born and raised, I probably should say, in Yonkers, New York, just outside New York City, and stayed there throughout my entire, childhood. I moved out in my junior year to St. Paul, Minnesota. And I was somewhat used to cold weather until I moved to St. Paul. And where during the winter, there might be 2 weeks where the high for the day without the wind chill is 25 below. And where, you know, people out there, if you have a plug coming out of your radiator area or the front grille of your vehicle, they know what that is. When I moved to Florida later on, they asked me if I had an electric vehicle, but I said, no, I came from Florida. I came from Minnesota, rather. So, but like I said, relatively unscathed. I did end up my last 2 years of college. I went to the College of St. Thomas in St. Paul, and my majors were psychology initially. I've always wanted to know what makes people tick. And I switched it over then because I really didn't want to be a social worker and I didn't want to be a psychologist. And I've always wanted to be in law enforcement. And so I really kind of wanted to know what made people click. And so I switched my major to sociology. That seemed to be more what I thought I would deal with, you know, the society in general, if I became a law enforcement officer. And so after I left college, I went into business because I couldn't, at that age, right away, get into law enforcement. Things were really tough back then. I'll probably show my age, but we're talking the early 70s. And so in the early 70s, it was when Adam 12 and all those other shows were on. It was just before a recession. And so a lot of people were looking for other ways of employment because they were getting laid off. And they thought, oh, I'll become a cop. I'll get, benefits. I'll get a good wage. And back then it was relatively, it wasn't as bad, even if you lived in Chicago or LA or whatever, or New York City, not as bad as things are even when I was in it, or especially now. And so I remember testing for Minnesota State Patrol at one time, and I was in St. Paul at the time, where I was testing, there were 3,000 applicants.
Holy cow.
Statewide for that test was 9,000 applicants for 25 open positions, of which, because of what was going on at the time in the country, 3 were for white males. And they gave you extra points if you were military or former military, if you were, you had a master's degree, a PhD, anything along those lines. If you were had some kind of ethnicity, all those type of things, or if you were already a police officer. And so, in fact, I was joking with somebody right next to me, and we said, gee whiz, if you were, let's say, a Black female with a Hispanic surname and you had a PhD and were already a cop, you probably wouldn't even have to take the test and they would take you. And so I scored like a 99 on the test, and I wasn't even in the top 10%. And so I decided I needed to go someplace else. And meanwhile, in Hennepin County, which everybody knows about now because of the trial that happened in Minneapolis and the whole thing with the George Floyd, I was the Hennepin County Special Deputy. We were the emergency squad. I was an EMT advanced. We went on all accidents, medical calls, things like this, helped out regular officers as well at accidents or whatever. And so that got me in the door, and I knew it would be good on a resume. And so I started off with that. I was testing all around the country, tested for the Texas Department of Public Safety. They were testing for 120. I was number 121, and they had no list. And so if people flunked out of the academy, you had to test again. But in those days, I didn't have the money to be traveling all around all of the time. And so it turns out half of the class flunked out, but I couldn't take the test again. The only reason I know that is because a friend of mine who was from Texas, was a former Marine, he had all those points for him as well. And so he made it and I didn't. And I just couldn't afford to go down there and test again. Not to mention we stayed with his family, so I didn't have any expenses to speak of. I would have had to pay all those expenses after that. So I still tested North Dakota Highway Patrol, a bunch of small towns where I would have been like one or two cops in the town. Finally, I tested number one in the city of Rawlins, Wyoming. Population during the winter, maybe 7,500. During the summer, because people going to Yellowstone, maybe 25,000.
Oh, wow.
35 officers. I learned a lot, about police work and different things, especially when you're in a small town and everybody knows you. And so, but I've always enjoyed it. In fact, my wife calls me a freak of nature because every job I've ever had since I was in high school, age 16, I got a part-time job in my high school's bookstore. And to the day I retired, I never called in sick once. And she calls me a freak of nature.
That's insane.
Yeah, it is. It is. I've always enjoyed what I did. Even when, I should have mentioned, right out of college, I went into insurance. And I had an insurance agency for 10 years. While I was testing and everything, it was still foremost in my mind. This is what I wanted to do. I was helping people with insurance and everything. I was not the salesperson that a lot of people were. I was the salesperson that helped people out. So I kept more people where they were winning the new business awards because they had to keep new business going to keep their income up. Yeah. I would keep the people because I gave them service. And so they didn't care about the price differences, which happens, it ebbs and flows all the time. Yeah. So I enjoyed it. I enjoyed the freedom. But when it came down to it, I was working about 80 hours a week. My secretary / assistant, who didn't have any licensing, per hour was making more than I was after I paid the bills and everything. And so I said, no, there's got to be a better way. I still want to be in law enforcement, which is how I ended up with that. In fact, you can see
in Montana, for Yellowstone, was it different being in a town where you could go and access Yellowstone versus a regular town that doesn't have an attraction? Did you notice any difference between being a police there versus other?
Well, I was about, maybe 3.5, 4 hours from Yellowstone itself. People would go up that way. And part of Yellowstone is in Wyoming, part of it's in Montana. Mm-hmm. And so, but the main road to it went right through our town.
So you would have people just stopping off on their way.
That's correct. Yeah.
Gotcha.
And so with that, and if they weren't, we had all kinds of things that happened. The center of town was 6,200 feet above sea level. So it was even higher than Denver, the Mile High city. And so a lot of older people ended up with altitude sickness. And so we had to deal with that if they were older, just a whole different way of, in my mind, policing compared to what I was used to. I had always lived in big cities or near big cities. the closest big city would have been Laramie, which was 90 miles away.
Did you spend your entire career there, or did you end up in a bigger city eventually?
Ended up in a bigger city. And I did, 6.5 years there. And I didn't quite meet the pension. I would have had to be vested for 10 years. So I took everything and we used that to start a new life. I probably, a person that I did field training on, I was his FTO, field training officer. He became the chief at one point in the future. I was glad, though, that I moved, because when he became chief, and I visited him, maybe 5 years later. And I said, hey, Mike, I don't know anybody here. I'm not going to tell anybody. It's probably public record anyway. I know what the previous chief, when I was there, was making. What do you make for a wage? And he told me it was $60,000 a year as the chief of police. At the time, with, 5 years in where I was in South Florida, I was making $82,000. Mm-hmm. Even though it was more expensive to live there, but it wasn't that much more. Mm-hmm. And I had the capability of working extra details like police officers do. And if you all are any kind of hockey fans, where the Florida Panthers play, that was in our city. And so I used to work those games. I used to work the concerts, all that kind of neat stuff.
Oh, that is cool.
Yeah. A little extra money. Yeah,
exactly. I made about an extra $12,000 a year doing that.
Nice.
Well, there you go. Can't beat that.
To the low six figures. And then, so as I mentioned, I had relatives that lived in South Florida, Boca Raton to be exact. And so I tested for 3 departments down there: Broward County Sheriff's Office, the Sunrise Police Department, and the Plantation Police Department, which was right next to Sunrise. All 3 wanted me. I actually took the job that had the lowest pay wage at that time, because it had all the things I wanted to do. They had take-home squad cars, which is a benefit, and they had K-9. Now, the sheriff's office did too. They wanted me, though, as a detention person first. And I said, no, listen, I've been a cop for 6.5 years. I don't want to be a jail person or a jailer.
Yeah, I don't blame you.
You work your way up. No, I don't want to work my way up. I've been there. I don't want to
been there, done that. Let's carry on.
Exactly. And so so I elected with Sunrise, and I'm glad I did, because after I was off probation, they happened to have an opening for K-9. I started the K-9 unit up in Rollins. And in fact, you could probably see right over here. I know your audience can't see it, but that's a picture of my dog and I in Sunrise. And
that's awesome.
So I had 2 dogs. I loved working K-9. And so I've done pretty much everything you can do to a certain extent in law enforcement as far as streetwise. I was traffic. I was K-9. I did investigations. In Rollins, we had to work all our own cases, no matter what it was. And so I got a lot of work in with regard to dealing with the county attorneys, state's attorneys, things like this. So it was really a really good experience.
That's awesome.
Sounds awesome. Yeah. I said the same thing.
So what's the most interesting scenario that you have encountered as a law enforcement officer?
Oh, there's so many of them.
Okay, pick your favorite. How about that one? Or the one that you like the most?
Good or bad?
Either one. Pick one of both. I don't mind. Either one.
Oh, goodness. I've got to say a lot of the, the craziest scenarios were when I was with the Hennepin County Sheriff's Emergency Squad, rolled up on an accident and was helping out the city police department. It was still in the county. and they couldn't figure out why it was a head-on collision. It turned out to be a fatal, and but they couldn't figure out why the person who was registered to the vehicle on the right was actually in the vehicle on the left, and the person in the vehicle registered to the vehicle on the left was actually in the right.
Oh my gosh, that's
it was
crazy.
A head-on. They actually flew past each other. They weren't wearing seatbelts, and that's why it was a fatal. But I mean, that was just crazy. Nobody had ever seen anything like that.
That is crazy.
And yeah, luckily as an EMT, I learned to, I guess, view death and stuff different than some people do. And always had respect for the body or whatever. But, there were two situations in Wyoming, for example. My first week on my own after FTO, after the police academy, my first 2 weeks on, I had 7 suicides that I went to.
Oh my gosh.
It was during the winter. A lot of times people get cabin fever up there.
Yeah.
And,
so cold,
for whatever reason, they were alone and just decided they didn't want to live anymore.
That's so sad.
It really is. And, that kind of thing wears on you.
Oh,
and
for sure.
I think probably the biggest one, and, I'll touch on something else a little bit later, but probably the biggest one, by my 4th year there, I was actually a supervisor on Sundays because sergeants had Sundays and Mondays off, and lieutenants had Saturdays and Sundays off. So on Sunday, it was Patrolman 3, which, you start off as a basic, then level 2, then level 3. And so there was only on Sundays 2 of us on in this small city. The most you would ever have on would be 6 people to a squad. And that was on Wednesdays when everybody was there for training. And so it was myself and I had one partner. But Sundays during the day is relatively quiet. It gets busier in the evening, but got a call of a baby not breathing. And the state penitentiary was in our city. And so what happened was a lot of times, especially in this one, it was a HUD building, and the females there would go visit their husband, boyfriends, whatever, who were incarcerated. So they would get babysitters or whatever. This babysitter put a 2-year-old boy and his 10-month-old baby sister into a tub for a bath. And then she got on the phone for like 15, 20 minutes with her boyfriend in another room. Finally, the little boy came out dripping wet and said, "My sister doesn't want to play with me anymore."
Oh, no.
So she went in there and the baby was face down in the water.
That's terrifying. Never leave a kid in the water.
No, I agree. So I got there. I was luckily like 2 blocks away by the time she called. And I flew there. I don't even remember much of getting there. I ran up, it was on the 2nd floor, ran up there, immediately started CPR. Luckily, on that kind of call, everybody responds, and it was only one other person. He pulled up as I was running out. I was thinking about how can I drive and do CPR at the same time. It was a small city, 8 square miles, so I knew that it was quicker for us to get to the hospital than to call an ambulance.
Yeah,
and
for sure.
It was that we were right in the middle of the city, but near the interstate, and the hospital's right off the next exit. And I think we did about 110 miles an hour on the interstate, and the building was 1 block away from the interstate. And unfortunately, the baby did not make it.
Oh, I was going to say, please tell me you saved her.
No, I wish I did.
That would have been like a movie.
I did save a bunch of people. I've got a life-saving award for at least 2 instances. Once where I ran into a burning building and pulled everybody out. But in this situation, I mean, we tried everything. But the bad part about it is, and this is where the shit gets real, to be honest with you. To that day, of course, when I was younger, we had friends that had babies and everything, and they'd say, "Here, would you like to hold our baby?" I had no problems with holding a baby, except baby spit up. Well, when somebody drowns, they get water in their lungs. When I was doing CPR and the baby had just eaten before that, I got, when baby spits up, the smell and everything. To this day, I cannot hold the baby.
Oh, man.
Because of the spit up?
Because of the spit up, yeah.
Yeah, and the smell and the memory that it triggers.
Yeah, and it still does. I mean, it's subdued, but it really affects me. That little girl right now would be about 32 years old.
Wow.
And actually more than that, because I did 32 years, but that was like, 4 years in. So yeah, she'd be about 32 years old, 33 years old if she was still around.
And the thing is a baby, that's hard to save. Like, it's not like a little boy or an adult. You'd have a better chance, but a baby, they're so fragile.
Yeah,
they are. Like they're resilient in some ways,
right?
But they're fragile in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
and he couldn't help her. He didn't know.
He didn't know.
Old.
Oh, come on.
Oh,
no,
yeah,
it's that the babysitter's fault.
She knew. She was 14.
100%. It was her fault.
Yeah, she was 14.
Sorry.
And to be honest with you, I don't remember if anything happened to her. It was my case. I don't remember filing anything on her. And I don't know if she got sued by the family. Probably not, because
they didn't have the money, probably.
They didn't have the money. And so who knows,
Yeah.
But
it's so sad, though.
Yeah.
That definitely sticks with you.
It wasn't even a lot of water, but it only takes 2 inches,
It doesn't take much for a little baby.
Yeah. And so
that definitely sticks with you.
The craziest that happened that also affected me quite a bit.
Yeah.
Yeah, my father was a police officer too, and one of the memories that he had also involved a little baby. A gentleman had come home from being out at the bar drinking and had the baby in bed with him, and he rolled over onto the baby and suffocated it.
Yeah, and that's it's just horrendous. There's no way around it, saying, "I wish this could have been different" or something. It is what it is, and so. Luckily we tried everything we could. I was 2 blocks away. My partner was there as I went downstairs. I grabbed the baby, started CPR. By the time I got downstairs, he was there. I jumped in the back seat of his car. We got to the hospital probably within 3 minutes of the call.
Yeah.
But there's just nothing that could have been done.
Like
yeah, that's the thing.
Like for 5 minutes.
Yeah, you have no idea how long she was in the water. I mean, that could have happened the moment she got on the phone, and she was already like that for 10 minutes.
Yeah, exactly. And so that was probably one of the biggest things.
Yeah,
I would say so. So how did you go from being in law enforcement to being an NLP practitioner? And for those of us, myself included, who don't know what an NLP practitioner is, can you tell us about it?
Sure. Well, when I retired, my last 18 years, I was actually inside, which made it a whole lot easier. Let the young guys, chase the bad guys. And by the time I went inside, I was, about 48 years old or so. But my last 18 years, I had to be a little less than that, maybe 42 years old. But I went inside and I was the officer in charge, supervisor of the information technology unit. And I had several people underneath me. But I was in charge of doing the budget that I would give, for the entire department to my captain, who would give it to the chief, and, this type of thing. I did a lot of programming at that point in time. Windows database type programming. It's a whole lot different now with everything online. And in fact, when I retired, that's what I started doing. Writing law enforcement, changing some of the stuff around that I already did. And so I was good in law enforcement, but I was really good, especially because of law enforcement, in communications, and then being the officer in charge of the unit in time management. It was like you're running, a little business. I only had 2 other employees, so to speak. But it's like running a little business, doing a budget, answering to somebody who could have been the board of directors, essentially. And so that got me interested. Every cop or firefighter, you probably know, has a side gig anyway. And I had that writing software, and, back when it was easy to fix computers, doing that type of thing. And so when I got out, I said, that's what I'm going to do. Well, that didn't quite pan out because everybody was buying, the expensive stuff, from these huge companies, records management systems and computer aided dispatch. And so I said, well, that's not working for me. So I was doing some websites and I really didn't enjoy that. So I said, I'm good in communications. So I already had a voice over IP system that I was using. And I said, I looked into it and you can become a partner without just going through their training, but there's no cost and they pay you in commissions. And so I can do this. And I enjoyed doing that. And I got more and more companies that I would partner with. And so I was doing that until COVID hit. COVID hit, lost half of my clients. And I had, back in 2 years ago, I had about 30 people that were ready to sign, some of them quite large. And it would have made a difference of anywhere from $1,000 to $2,000 a month in commissions. And now, mind you, I do this because I like to, not because I necessarily need the money, but I don't play golf very well and I don't watch soap operas. Yep. And so I just don't want to sit at home. And so my wife's the same way. She retired this past year from the school district, and she actually was coach before I became a coach. So when all this happened, we were talking, and I said, I don't know what I'm going to do now. Everybody's still away from their offices, and I can't sell ice to an Eskimo right now. And so she said, well, what did you do for all that time in law enforcement? Well, I started going through the litany. She goes, no. What did you really, really do? She was pushing me, and I finally, I'm kind of dumb. 15 minutes later, I finally got it out that when I got through the helping part. And then she says, and when you help people, like, what do I do? And then I said, I coached people, which is essentially what a law enforcement officer does. Whether it be on a domestic or whatever, you're settling things and you're coaching them. You're actually telling people what they really know already and maybe just not fresh in their mind. So I became a certified life coach and then a certified master life coach. That introduced me to NLP, which is neuro-linguistic programming. Mm-hmm. It's a way of coaching, but what interested me is that it helps people communicate better. And as I mentioned, I was all into the communication. And so I wanted to know more about it. It helps people become more in rapport with other people, saying the right things at the right time, these type of things. It's actually been called waking hypnosis. So because you're learning how the subconscious versus the conscious mind and how you can bypass the conscious mind, even though they're not in hypnosis, and work down with their subconscious mind. And well, that interested me even more. So I became an NLP practitioner, went through all the courses. Of course, a lot of it was virtual and all, and had to do virtual tests and talk to people online that I knew what I was doing and all this, do essay questions and exams. And I had to do all of that. So then I wanted to move on. So I became a master practitioner. Again, same thing. You learn more traits, obviously, and more skills. Mm-hmm. So then I said, well, where do I go from here? Well, I became an NLP trainer. And so the only difference between that and a master trainer is the number of people that number of years and the number of people that you've trained. I haven't got to that level. But again, I was always a teacher. I was a certified law enforcement instructor in the state of Wyoming and in the state of Florida. And I used to teach all the officers when they did get a computer-aided dispatch system or, this type of thing, we put mobile data terminals in their vehicles. And I had to teach them how to use these things. Mm-hmm. Some of the older guys, they didn't even know how to turn on a computer half the time. In fact, I remember this one officer, we used to have a cart when we didn't have enough for everybody. They used to switch out every shift. They bring it in 10 minutes early, leave it in this cart. Another person would take it out. If it was something wrong with it, they'd put a note on it. First thing in the morning, I'd look at it. Had somebody that said the computer will not boot up. I brought it upstairs. The battery was depleted, but I figured, okay, because, they left it there without turning it off, and turned it on. Everything worked perfectly. I caught him as he came in on the next shift, and I said, hey, Frankie, what happened? It worked perfectly. And I said the battery was low, or, it wasn't, had no charge left. And so what happened? He says, I don't know, I was using it and then it went blank and I couldn't bring it back up. I said, did you have it plugged in? And he says, oh, okay. He didn't have it plugged in. I kid him to that day that, his computer should have been nuclear powered, but it wasn't. And so, but I was teaching people, and that's what I love doing. And that's what I did with NLP. And that's what I do with coaching. But as I was doing that, I became more and more interested in hypnosis. And so I became a, certified hypnotist. But I wasn't really helping people with that. I didn't want to always do the smoking thing or whatever. I wasn't helping people. And I had the opportunity to go to a 4-day, really intensive class to become a board certified clinical hypnotherapist, which I just did this past November. And so now I can do that. In fact, I've had 4 clients this past week that have helped out with various things, and it makes me feel good.
I love that. And we actually had a previous guest who did RTT, which is rapid transformation therapy, and she did a lot with hypnotherapy too. So it's interesting to see how each of you use it differently and for what. Yeah.
And it turns out that most of these people were, they're successful, but they wanted more self-confidence. Or one is giving me a referral and they had fear of flying. And so,
hey, Rieta, it's your turn. You need to go through her hypnotherapy. She hates the flying and the anxiety.
Oh, really?
It's not actually the fear of flying. It's I don't like not having control. That I'm stuck in this tube. That I can't do anything about it. I'm on it until it's over.
Maybe you need some hypnotherapy.
Yeah. I guess I do. It's probably healthier than Xanax.
Yeah. I know somebody to give you a good deal.
You've been married for a long time. Do you have any marriage advice or what we can do to keep our marriage thriving for us younger bucks?
I get that asked quite a bit. And 2 things I can think of is unconditional love and mutual respect. Mm-hmm. If you got those things going, what happens is she's my best friend. And, it just, what it's like, even if you have a BFF, girlfriend or whatever, you would do anything for each other. Well, obviously that's the way it should be with spouses too, but I've seen way too much where it wasn't that way. I can't count the number of domestics I went on in my career. And I'm just thinking, what's wrong here?
Yeah. My dad said the same thing. That was one of the things that he dealt with the most was domestics.
In fact, probably my most favorite law enforcement time, based on what I just mentioned about the mutual respect and everything, because I believe it should be that way and the family decides. The kids should also have mutual respect, unconditional love. And unfortunately, sometimes something happens to their brain. And I'll throw my daughter under the bus here. At 14, she lost her mind. And she gained it back when she was 29 years old.
I have to say, my mom would probably say the same thing, except for that I probably gained it back at like 25.
Yeah. And she's 43 now. So we've had a real good relationship since then. I can't always say it was great during that time period. But I'm just thankful we were able to do that. But with that in mind, probably you asked about the craziest things. This wasn't a crazy thing when I asked good or bad. And I'll try to cut this down because it really is more of an extended story, but I can cut it down a bit. When I was back on the road, I stopped. It was a Friday night and I knew we'd be busy. You always kind of were on Fridays. You got lucky if you weren't. And so I decided it was around 5:30 at night, and it was during, quote, winter time. And so therefore it was dark at 5:30. And I went into a McDonald's. I said, let me take a quick break now because I may not get a chance to eat a little bit later, even though I only went on duty like 3 hours before that. And if I got a break, I was lucky. So I was in my zone, and I saw this one girl and a group of kids around. And it turns out this one girl was a girl that was a habitual runaway. And she always had a juvenile pickup order against her. And I knew it. I knew she had a current one. And so I didn't even get anything to eat because I saw her as I walked in. So I sat down and I called her over, and I don't know why, time in the past, she probably would have run, but she did come over, and I talked to her, and I don't remember her name, to be honest with you, but I'm going to call her Mary. So Mary came over, and I was talking to her, and I said, Mary, I know you're always running away. You're in the next zone over. So I know about all this. What is going on? Tell me. And so for whatever reason, she didn't bullshit me. She told me what was going on with her. And she said, listen, my mom's a single mom. They were, the husband and she were divorced. Dad was no longer present anywhere. And she says she just doesn't listen to me. Now, Mary was like 14 years old. And that's why, 14, it seems teenagers at that age, for some reason, 13, 14, middle school, things happen. And she said, Mom just doesn't listen to me. I say stuff to her, and then she goes off on me, and I go off on her, and then I leave the house. She calls me in, pickup order. You guys pick me up, take me down to juvenile intake. She comes and picks me up, and it repeats again and again and again. And I said, this is not good for you or for her. I'm sure she doesn't want to do it, but she's concerned about you. So we had that conversation kind of. Then I asked her, listen, you know that every other cop would probably arrest you. And I mean, it wasn't an arrest. It was putting her in handcuffs and taking her down to juvenile intake. And I said, listen, I'm not going to do that, but it's on conditions. And she was kind of interested, like, hey, who's this weirdo cop that's not going to do his job? And I probably would have got in trouble back then. But, cops have, and Rhett, I'm sure that your dad would tell you this, we do have discretion. And that's a big part of police work. It's not always black and white. Yeah. And so it wasn't a crime that she was committing. She was a runaway. So it did me no good to take her down there because it would just repeat it. So I said, listen, the conditions are, first of all, do you have someplace you can stay tonight where you'll be safe? She said, yeah, my friend's over there, and she mentioned one of the other girls' name. I knew the family because, we were in usually one zone for the entire 4 or 5 days we were on. We worked 10-hour shifts at that time, so it was usually 4 days on. And I knew it was a good family and stuff. And I said, okay, stay there tonight. Promise me you'll stay there. She said, I will. I said, promise me you will go home in the morning before 9:00. She said, I promise. I said, I think you're hopefully going to find something different. She said, okay, I promise I will do that. I don't think you're right, but I promise I will do that. I said, now remember, I'm doing my part of the bargain. You need to do yours. So I then put myself out on a call at their house, next zone over, and probably 2 miles away, but I went there. And I talked to the mom. And I said, listen, I know that you have a juvenile pickup order, and I just met with your daughter, and she's safe. She's okay. She's staying with some friends. I'm not going to tell you who they are, because this is the deal I made with her. And she said, okay, so she'll be home in the morning. I said, yes, but the problem isn't solved yet. her coming home is not solving the problem. The problem is you two going after each other all the time. So I talked to her, and, it was one of those things. She'd been working usually all day. She was exhausted. She was, at her wit's end. And here you have a teenager who's always bouncing off the walls. All teenagers do, all kids do, let's face it. Mm-hmm. And so that was part of the problem. And so we talked for a bit. I tried to be like, I was a parent as well. My daughter at the time was, 15 or 16. And I said, listen, I know exactly what it's like. If, she didn't come back at you like this. And we talked about that as well, me and Mary, that it's better just to sit there, not say anything, as compared to fueling the fire. So I said the same thing to Mom. And I said, listen, also, do you have a pastor, school counselor, somebody you can meet with? She said, yeah, we can meet with the pastor or whatever. And I knew who that was. I said, please do that for both your sake and for your daughter's. You need a little bit of counseling. If your insurance will pay for it, do that, whatever it takes. And I said, please promise me that. She did promise me. I didn't hear anything for the next couple of weeks. I got moved to a different zone. We switched every 6 months. And then soon after that, I went inside. So I wasn't listening to the radio all the time. Well, probably 10 years later, I'm working at the arena I just mentioned about. And normally I used to work in the back where the employees came in because you had a few extra hours there. So it was really nice extra money. And to be honest with you, I was too old to be dealing with the fights and the drunk people, stuff like that during concerts. But this was a Sugarland concert. I love Sugarland. And usually the country folk aren't that way until after the concert. They don't get, shit-faced during the concert itself. Yeah. And like a lot of, because they want to hear the music, as compared to, I can't tell you how many times I remember a KISS concert where 6 of our officers got hurt. And yeah. And so as people were coming in, they're going through the, detectors and everything. And this lady with this little girl is maybe, 5 years old or something, comes up to me. And she's looking at me. Of course, I'm 10 years older now. And she said, Officer Ferguson. And of course, I had it on my breast. And I said, yes. She goes, do you remember me? And I said, no, I'm sorry, I don't. Can you give me a hint? And she just said her first name. And it didn't strike. And she said, you didn't arrest me once. Boom, it hit me. She said, we went through counseling. We did everything you mentioned. My mom and I became best friends.
Aww.
I'm sorry. This always hits me. This is many years later and still hits me. She said that I saved her life. She didn't want that for her daughter. She had more self-respect for herself. She actually became a registered nurse, was doing very well, was married, had, a fantastic husband, had this little girl. She said, this girl is not going to go through what I went through.
Oh,
that's so sweet.
I love it. How amazing. Just one little conversation.
Yeah. So to this day, that's the good PTSD, I guess.
Yeah. The good memories.
Yeah. And, and that was one of the, I don't want to say the last ones. I had some other ones beyond that, but nothing to that magnitude. And so it pretty much wipes away all the other bad crap that I put up with, which I still enjoyed going in and helping people. But, you can't see this stuff day in and day out without it affecting you. And I did not do what a lot of cops do. And if there's some of your audience that are still law enforcement officers, I did not go out there, squad parties, things like that, where all you guys do is, and I know it, talk about all the bad things, the bad supervisors, the bad this, the bad that. when you start throwing bad into everything, things will be bad. If you have good attitude, good things will come.
Yeah.
It's a law of attraction. If you're attracting bad, you're going to get bad. And, and so I didn't do any of that stuff. I went home to my family all the time. Mm-hmm. That was more important to me, which is why we're still all together, very happy. So in a way, this was roundabout also to answer your question, Rieta, on how we stay together, because I learned a lot from being a police officer. It taught me to not look at things and things are different than they are at first sight a lot of times. You have to really know the whole story before you make judgment. And so that's a big part. It taught me patience. Sometimes when you go to these calls all the time, you say, oh, here we go again, Mm-hmm. Shit really does get real. I thought, okay, there's an old adage that you leave law enforcement in one of three ways: in handcuffs, in a body bag, or with your head held high. I was fortunate enough to leave that last way.
Yeah. So for anybody who wants to get in touch with you, what's the best way to contact you?
The best way is I've got a personal website. It's a branding website. It has all my social media. It has all of my contact information, where you can email me, call me, text me, anything like that. And it's obviously the HTTPS in front of it, but the actual URL is JANF, that's JANF as in Frank, 360.com.
All right. Thank you so much. Thank you for being a guest.
Yeah, thank you so much.
This is How to Deal When Shit Gets Real, guys. So it's coming out bi-weekly now, every Friday, every 2 weeks. And we will see you guys next episode.